Okay, so you've probably seen the headlines flying around about these new tariffs. They just kicked in, right? April 2nd, 2025, Donald Trump's initiative.
Yep, exactly. Big news.
Big news indeed. So today, in this deep dive, we're going to try and, cut through the noise. We've looked at the news, the analysis, the immediate reactions from other countries
Hmm.
to really pull out the essential stuff for you. Think of it like a quick guide to what's a pretty major shift in the global economy.
Yeah, definitely feels significant.
So our mission today is basically to figure out, okay, what does Trump actually want to achieve with these? What are other countries saying and, more importantly, doing right now? And what could this all mean for the U.S. economy and, for regular folks?
And it's fascinating just how ambitious this whole thing is. It's not like a minor adjustment.
No, not at all.
We're looking at potentially reshaping how the U.S. trades with, well, everyone, and it seems driven by some very specific goals.
Okay, let's get into those goals then. What are Trump's main arguments for these tariffs? From what we've seen, a big one is boosting the U.S. economy, right? Specifically, bringing back factory jobs. That's been a constant theme.
Right, the manufacturing base.
And then, it seems like these tariffs are also maybe a tool, like to push other countries to sort of align with U.S. interests.
Yeah, leverage using economic pressure for other goals.
And then there's the classic economic argument, balancing trade, cutting the U.S. deficit, that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Standard tariff talk, in a way.
But here's where it gets maybe a bit different. There's this idea that the tariffs could bring in so much money, maybe even enough to cut taxes.
Yeah.
He's even mentioned President McKinley, like looking back historically.
Like the revenue argument. And yeah, the McKinley reference is interesting. If you connect all that, you see this picture emerge, make imports pricier, hope U.S. goods get more competitive, jobs come back.
Okay.
Then the tariff money helps the deficit, maybe funds tax cuts, like a cycle. But, comparing it to McKinley, the world's so different now.
How so?
Well, globalization wasn't nearly what it is today. Supply chains weren't this complex, this interconnected. The ability for other countries to hit back quickly and hard was way lower back then.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. The interconnectedness is key. So let's look at the specifics. As of April 2nd, what are we actually seeing? There's a 20% tariff on Chinese goods, yeah?
Correct. 20% on China.
And the stated reason for that one is fentanyl. Stopping the flow.
That's the official line, yes. Stopping fentanyl.
Okay. And then Mexico and Canada. It's 25% on goods from both.
25%, yep. And the stated goal there is stopping illegal border crossings.
Huh. And importantly, our sources say these are meant to be temporary. Like they last until those specific problems, fentanyl, border crossings, are solved, at least in Trump's view.
Which is, well, it's an unusual approach tying trade tariffs so directly to non-economic issues like drug trafficking and immigration. Usually tariffs are about, protecting industries or balancing trade deficits. And the temporary part adds a lot of uncertainty for businesses, right? They need predictability for planning, for investment. Temporary tariffs don't really offer that.
No kidding. Well, the countries hit by this aren't exactly sitting quietly. China's response seems pretty major. Tariffs on, what, $60 billion of U.S. stuff?
$60 billion, yeah. And importantly, hitting U.S. farm products. That's going to hurt certain communities.
Definitely. But maybe even more strategically, they're restricting exports of rare earth minerals. What exactly are those and why is that a big deal?
Oh, that's a huge deal. Rare earths are elements like neodymium, dysprosium, things you absolutely need for modern tech. Magnets in electric cars, smartphones, wind turbines, military tech.
Wow, okay.
And China dominates the global supply. So restricting exports isn't just about hitting current manufacturing. It could seriously hamstring future U.S. development in green energy, advanced tech. It's a potent weapon.
So not just a trade spat, potentially a block on innovation.
Potentially, yeah. And they're hinting they might do more if things escalate.
Okay. What about Mexico? They're hitting back too.
Yep. Tariffs targeting U.S. steel, pork, and corn specifically. Plus, they've promised a, quote, comprehensive program of response. Seems like they're not necessarily trying to match dollar for dollar, but targeting sensitive sectors.
Pork and corn. That sounds like it hits the agricultural sector again.
Exactly. Especially corn, that's a huge part of U.S.-Mexico farm trade.
Yeah.
Politically sensitive stuff.
And Canada, our northern neighbor.
Canada's response is pretty hefty, too. 25% tariffs on up to $30 billion in U.S. agricultural goods. Maybe more later.
$30 billion. Wow. And the language from their incoming Prime Minister, Mark Carney, something about maximizing damage.
Yeah, that's the quote. Pledge to maximize damage to the U.S. economy until the tariffs are gone. That's strong language between close allies.
Really strong. What does that kind of rhetoric signal?
It signals just how disruptive these tariffs are, even to long-standing friendly trade relationships. It shows Canada's ready to push back hard, economically speaking.
Not just North America and China, though, is it?
Yeah.
What about the EU?
Right. The European Union was kind of bracing for this, it seems. They're reportedly readying $28 billion in tariffs, supposedly starting April 1st, actually, so they might already be in effect.
Wow, okay. What are they targeting?
A real mix. U.S. steel, aluminum, textiles, appliances, and interestingly, big tech.
Big tech, like Google, Apple, Amazon. Why them?
That seems likely, yeah. It probably ties into ongoing tensions the EU has with U.S. tech giants over things like data privacy, taxes, market dominance. Targeting them hits a really visible, valuable sector.
And it sounds like this could escalate fast if there aren't negotiations.
Very fast. The EU's broad list suggests they want to make the impact felt across the U.S. economy. The fact they had these ready shows they anticipated this move.
Interesting, but not everyone's retaliating directly, right? Vietnam.
Vietnam's taking a different path, it seems. They're actually cutting tariffs on some U.S. goods, LNG, cars, and they approved Starlink.
Huh. Why would they do that?
It looks like a strategic move, maybe trying to position themselves as a more stable, attractive trading partner, while others are in disputes. Potentially attracting businesses looking to shift supply chains away from the uncertainty could be a smart long-term play.
A calculated move, potentially. What about Japan? Big trading partner.
Japan's taking it very seriously. They've set up a task force just to study these tariffs. Looks like they're facing 24% on some goods. They're considering options, including retaliation, especially focusing on cars, which is huge for both countries.
Oh, a task force.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're being cautious but watching closely.
Exactly. Given how much they export to the U.S., especially cars, they have a lot at stake. They'll be very considered in their response.
And even Australia, another close ally.
Yeah, their prime minister, Albanese, called the baseline 10% tariff unfriendly. But at least for now, they seem to want to negotiate rather than jump straight to retaliation.
So allies are unhappy, but maybe trying to find another way first.
It highlights that delicate balance, doesn't it? Expressing displeasure, but trying not to completely blow up important relationships.
Definitely paints a complex picture.
Yeah.
And when you look closer at Trump's goals, you mentioned those specific temporary ones.
Mm-hmm.
Don't they kind of contradict the other goals?
How do you mean?
Well, like the tariffs on China, Mexico, Canada are meant to fix fentanyl and border crossings, right?
Yeah.
And they're temporary.
Mm.
So if they work and those problems get solved, the tariffs go away.
Right.
Which means that revenue source disappears. So they can't really be a long-term plan for balancing trade or funding tax cuts, can they?
That's a really sharp point. Yeah, the temporary nature completely undermines the argument that they're a reliable revenue source or a permanent trade rebalancing tool. It strongly suggests the main goal is those non-economic issues, the drugs, the border. The economic effects might just be the stick to achieve that.
Okay. And then the idea of tariffs replacing income tax revenue.
The scale seems off, way off. Our sources suggest you'd need tariffs maybe around 100%, maybe even higher, to get anywhere close to the trillions income tax brings in.
100% tariffs.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine the price hikes on everything? The economic shock? It seems incredibly unlikely to work without massive disruption and consumer anger.
So what are the immediate risks we should be watching for? What are the costs for the U.S.?
Well, first off, prices. For goods, the U.S. doesn't make much of domestically, think coffee, lots of electronics components. Certain materials prices are likely going up.
Stuff consumers buy every day.
Exactly. Then there's market reaction. We've already seen some reports of stock market jitters. Uncertainty isn't good for markets. And then companies. If their costs go up significantly because of tariffs on imported parts or materials, they might have to cut costs elsewhere. Our sources mentioned Jeep potentially looking at job cuts as a response.
Wow, so direct impact on jobs potentially.
It really shows how hard it is to just, stop decades of global trade flows. It's all tangled together. American companies rely on imported inputs. Tariffs hit them too, not just foreign companies.
And it sounds like the economic thinking behind this whole tariff strategy is getting criticized.
Yeah, quite a bit. Some experts are calling it simplistic, lazy, even like a kid's economics homework was one quote. There's apparently not a lot of deep, detailed economic modeling being shared by Trump's team, and as we've seen, the reaction from allies and global leaders is largely negative, which isn't a great sign.
Why is that lack of detailed analysis a problem?
Because trade policy is incredibly complex. Simple actions can have huge unforeseen ripple effects. Making big moves without really thinking through all the potential consequences, well, it risks making things worse, not better. And the negative reactions from allies, that just makes retaliation more likely and cooperation on other issues harder.
So let's bring it back to the listener. Why should they really care about all this complex trade stuff?
Well, the most direct way is probably your wallet. Tariffs often mean higher prices for imported goods or even US made goods that use imported parts. So everyday stuff could get more expensive.
Okay, cost living impact.
Definitely. It also connects to jobs. If US companies that export face retaliatory tariffs, like farmers are seeing now, that hurts their business, potentially leading to layoffs. Or if companies relying on imports face higher costs, like the Jeep example, that can also impact jobs
Ripe security.
and the overall economy's health. Trade wars can slow growth, spook investors. It has wider effects.
And I think what's interesting is how counterintuitive it can be. Like, a policy meant to help U.S. industry might end up hurting U.S. consumers or other U.S. industries through retaliation.
It's definitely not straightforward.
Not at all.
Hmm.
Understanding these dynamics is, well, it's going to be important for everyone trying to navigate the economy going forward. Being aware of how this might hit prices, jobs, investments, it helps you make more informed choices yourself. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Summing up our deep dive today, Donald Trump's rolled out these aggressive new tariffs. The stated goals are mixed: boost the U.S. economy, tackle issues like drugs and immigration, rebalance trade.
A broad agenda.
But it's hitting major pushback. Strong opposition, serious countermeasures from China, Mexico, Canada, the EU, hitting key U.S. exports like agriculture and tech inputs.
Right, the retaliation is swift and significant.
And this carries real risks, right? Higher prices for Americans, potential job losses, market instability, the overall effectiveness, the long-term impact.
Yeah.
It all seems really uncertain right now, especially with how fast everyone's reacting.
Absolutely. It really throws into sharp relief just how interconnected everything is globally. You pull one string over here and things start moving unexpectedly all over the place. The strong reactions show you can't easily act in isolation in today's economy.
So on that note, here's maybe a final thought to chew on. Given this deep interconnectedness, how might these initial reactions we're seeing? How might they evolve? Could China do more with rare earths? Could the EU broaden its targets? And what totally unforeseen consequences might pop up down the road from shaking up trade this dramatically?
Yeah, the second and third order effects are often the ones that really surprise you.
Definitely something to keep watching closely as this whole situation continues to unfold.